girls run upstairs and tell your mother that Mrs. Murphy has arrived and will meet with her in the sitting room." Lottie coughed as she and Daisy ran up the steps. Mrs. Murphy watched for a moment. "Is the girl sick?" "No, but she does suffer with a cough some of the time." Mrs. Murphy nodded. "I see. Well, I don't want to take charge of children in need of constant medical care, if you know what I mean. I'm not good around sickness and such." Callie peered at the woman, wondering why she would become a nanny if she didn't want to care for a sick child. All children are ill from time to time, but the Bridgeport children are generally quite healthy. "Good. Glad to hear it." The two of them were as different as night and day, clearly separated by much more than their years. Using her own 5'6" height as a guide, Callie surmised Mrs. Murphy would measure a mere 5 feet, perhaps a little less. The woman's hair was dull and askew, while Callie's rich coffee-brown hair bore a beautiful sheen and had been carefully arranged. She couldn't condemn the woman for the deep lines that creased her weathered face, or for the extra pounds that had settled around her midriff. She'd obviously lived enough years to earn every wrinkle and pound. Still, Mrs. Murphy's outward form proved a stark contrast to Callie's flawless complexion and trim figure. There hadn't been much wind this morning, so Callie decided the woman's rumpled appearance must have come about during her boat ride across the Argosy River from Biscayne. If not, Mrs. Bridgeport might dismiss the woman before she'd even begun her position. "Would you like to straighten your hat before we sit down, Mrs. Murphy? There's a mirror in the sitting room that you can use." Callie waved the older woman toward a rectangular mirror surrounded by a frame of molded brass and tortoiseshell. The mirror was perfectly centered above an ebony side table. With its spiral-turned legs and carved ivory figurines, the table was a favorite purchase of the Bridgeports, made during their European travels. Mrs. Murphy stepped in front of the mirror, tucked one loose strand of hair behind her ear, gave the no-nonsense felt hat a tug, and turned around. "That will do for now. I figure the missus is more interested in my ability to care for the children than whether my hat is perched at a proper angle." She propelled herself across the room with a short-legged gait and settled on the pale blue upholstered settee. Her feet barely touched the floor, and Callie wondered if this woman would prove capable of handling young Thomas Bridgeport. At 12 years of age, he was already taller than Mrs. Murphy, though she likely outweighed him by at least 20 pounds. Still, Thomas could be a handful, especially if he decided he didn't like someone. "I understand you've worked as a nanny for several wealthy families in the area, Mrs. Murphy." Callie took a seat in an open armchair near the settee. From the appearance of her work-worn hands and ragged fingernails, Callie wondered if Mrs. Murphy's recent employment had been as a nanny or a housekeeper. Callie immediately scolded herself for the judgmental notion. She disliked the fact that so many of the women in the Bridgeport circle of friends judged everything from outward appearance. Shortly after she'd begun to work for the family, Callie realized that she'd taken on some of those same behaviors. Over the past couple of years, she'd been asking God to nudge her when such thoughts crossed her mind. God had been faithful to answer her request. It seemed as though he was prodding her far more frequently than she'd expected. Mrs. Murphy squared her shoulders. "I sent my letter of reference to Mrs. Bridgeport." Callie hadn't intended to insult the woman, but Mrs. Murphy certainly appeared offended. "I know she was pleased with the recommendation, or she wouldn't have hired you to work with the children." Mrs. Murphy gave a firm nod that jostled her hat back to its previous off-centered position. Given the woman's curt reply, Callie couldn't decide if she should mention the hat. Before she could make up her mind, Mrs. Bridgeport